Did you know that Quaaludes are making a comeback? Quaalude was the party drug of the 1970s, so much so that it's become a cultural reference point nodding to the excesses of that decade, alongside big hairdos.
I deal Quaaludes and I fuck selected older men who don't want to get involved.
Wife swapping.
I do floating swingers parties.
And bell-bottom jeans.
That's when I learned that Quaaludes and water skiing do not mix.
You know this already though, because you've seen Leonardo DiCaprio flopping around on the floor in The Wolf of Wall Street. However, what you might not know is that after a vicious crackdown by the DEA in the 1980s, the drug basically vanished. It became a pharmaceutical ghost of the past. Well, apart from in South Africa, but we'll get onto that. At the moment they're making a comeback in sort of niche psychonaut circles, but there's only one person I know who's actually taken them in recent times, and that's a journalist who we're going to hear from throughout this video.
And they come up to me and just put 300 Quaaludes underneath my nose.
On top of hearing his experiences with Quaaludes, which to be honest with you is a cautionary tale, we're also going to learn what exactly is this drug, how does it work on the brain, and how did it become so massive in the 1970s. This is the rise, the fall, and the recent comeback of Quaaludes. The word Quaalude was originally a popular brand name for mefaclone, a sedative hypnotic drug with anti-anxiety properties. Its molecules bind to GABA receptors, the inhibitory neurotransmitter responsible for regulating anxiety while promoting sleep and rest. Increasing activity of GABA slows down the brain, reduces neuron activity, reduces blood pressure and heart rate, along with reduced breathing rate. Overall, it leads to a state of relaxation. And some users report that if they resist the urge to sleep, the effects include a mellow euphoria. The muscle relaxant qualities, along with it producing a state of lowered inhibitions, means that it was widely used as a sex drug in the late 1960s, throughout the 1970s, and in the first half of the 1980s. But there's a lot of negatives. It can be addictive, hellishly moreish, tolerance can build rapidly, and it can be very easy to overdose on, especially if it's mixed with other downers like alcohol, benzos, ketamine, G, or opioids. It's easy to become accidentally over-sedated on Quaaludes, which could lead to difficulty concentrating, irrational decisions, slurred speech, blacking out, and a lack of coordination. Ways to reduce the potential risks of Quaalude include starting with a small dose and assessing how you feel rather than taking a larger dose all at once.
We'll cut it in half. That's fair.
Having a trusted person present and not operating heavy machinery like a car while under the influence. So take me back to that moment then that Jamie had showed you the pills. Were they just look like normal pharmaceutical pills?
Kind of. They were in like capsules, and they were in this vacuum sealed packet that said lemon 714. But I think he was also just like, there was like a sort of boyish kind of state of like excited wonder. He'd only just got them. I think he wanted to.
He wanted someone to go on the adventure with, didn't he?
Exactly. He wanted someone to go on the adventure. Yeah, I didn't put up much of a fight. I mean, he's a very persuasive guy, and like it was the night before New Year's Eve, and so I took 2, which is a significant dose, and after about 20 minutes, I was very like gooey, and really wanted to chat with Jamie. You really kind of like leave your inhibitions, like, you're very sort of, floaty. It's almost like a kind of more zen version of GHB.
Okay, so it's like a heavy sedative. So you would describe it more like GHB than, for instance, a benzo?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. It's less energizing than G, but a bit more like a benzo in that sense of it being a downer, right? But definitely a lot more expansive and euphoric than a benzo. There's a moorishness to Quaaludes that there isn't with some other kind of, many other drugs, I felt like I wanted to take more. But then the thing is, right, they're sleeping pills. You have to kind of fight the urge to sleep to then get into the real sort of euphoria, whereas I didn't. But I had like an incredibly blissful sleep.
So you just fell asleep?
Yeah.
Very deep sleep?
Very deep sleep.
How long did you sleep for?
Probably like 9 hours.
Okay.
It was a big sleep.
So you woke up and you thought, oh, I fancy another one, and you had some lying there.
Well, it was New Year's Eve.
And it's also a party day, New Year's Eve.
And so, yeah, we took them.
It was one of the most abused prescription drugs in the world during the 1970s, and it was also the biggest party drug of that decade. But the story of its journey to world domination actually started in the 1950s. Methaqualone was first synthesized in India in 1951 by a pharmaceutical company interested in using it as an anti-malarial medication. By 1960, it was out of patent, and many pharmaceutical companies around the world started developing preparations using it. They were designed to treat insomnia and anxiety. These products were marketed under various brand names: Mandrax in the UK and Australia,
It'd be great if all history could be written on a mandrax.
Revenal in Germany, and the one that the drug became universally known as in the end,
The Quaalude.
which is a wordplay on quiet interlude. People who were anxious and struggled to sleep found it astonishingly effective. A typical dose of 300 milligrams would take effect in about 30 minutes and could make the user deeply relaxed for between 5 and 8 hours. There was a huge demand for sedatives in 1960s America, but the barbiturates that were popular in the 1950s had fallen out of fashion. That's because they had a high potential for addiction and were very easy to overdose on, especially when mixed with alcohol. Presumably saddened by their financial loss, Big Pharma introduced new sedatives onto the market in the 1960s. This included benzos, which they originally claimed were safe, but they turned out to be very addictive, coming with potentially fatal withdrawals, and Quaaludes. They set up stress clinics, and which was a place where pretty much anyone could rock up and pay for a Quaalude prescription from a licensed physician. By the late 1960s, these clinics with their lax prescribing practices became very popular. But they weren't filled with just people who wanted to soothe their anxiety or have a better night's sleep. Their customers also included people who simply wanted to get on the sesh. Quaaludes had become a party drug, the party drug of the moment. The pills, or capsules, ludes as they were often called, had been absorbed by a diverse range of societal subsets. Different people seemed to use them for different purposes. Businessmen used them for their soothing effect, to smooth out the edges of the corporate environment. Housewives took them to help with the pressure of having to maintain a perfect house, a perfect dinner, and a perfect smile. Along with the anti-anxiety effect and the help with relaxing, ludes also produced a mellow euphoria and lowered someone's inhibitions. This means that for some people it was ideal as a sex drug. Counterculture hippies were onto this, as were the bohemians in New York City. It was used for the same purposes on the glam rock scene and disco-soaked dance floors of the 1970s, earning it the nickname Disco Biscuits. Lemon 714 was the most iconic stamp of Quaalude pills. Manufactured by the Lemon Company in the US, the large, white, circular pills became a major cultural symbol, a reference point nodding to the excesses of the 1970s. Keith Richards was busted possessing it without a prescription. Ozzy Osbourne admitted he was banged into them too. David Bowie sang about it. So did Frank Zappa. And the Kinks. Here's a 1973 news report from the New York Times. Quote, in New Jersey, rock music fans showed up at concerts wearing t-shirts labelled Captain Quaalude. In Berkeley, someone passes around a vial of white tablets at a party, and within half an hour, it had turned into an orgy. In Rhode Island, a drunken driver hit a telephone pole with a car, only to emerge from the wreck laughing hysterically. Behind these incidents is a relatively new drug, the sedative hypnotic, generically known as mefacqualone. This video is brought to you by Easy Test Kits, quick, reliable and affordable drug testing kits for various party prescriptions. If you want to learn more or pick up, say, an MDMA testing kit, then click in the description below and use my promo code SESH for a 10% discount. And if you want to go deep on these topics, if you really want to geek out, then check out my Patreon where you can see the extended interviews for free. The link is in the description below.
It was New Year's Eve, and we went to this party, and I'd taken like a small cocktail of drugs that night, which I don't necessarily advocate for. And then around 3 a.m. I took one Quaalude, and I ended up, and this is kind of embarrassing. I'm sort of, I was weighing up, like, should I share this in the article? But then it just felt remiss not to. Like, it felt like dishonest as a journalist not to. I ended up sort of, not passing out, but just needing to sleep so bad that I ended up just like lying down on a sidewalk in Vancouver, in like the back streets of Vancouver next to this after party, and just sort of falling asleep on the pavement.
Why do you think it happened so suddenly that you didn't even have a chance to get an Uber home?
Well, it was the combination, because I'd taken some G,
okay,
and I didn't quite realise, at the time, the extent to which they both work on GABA. That's a large part of the purpose for me is kind of sharing this unfortunate and somewhat embarrassing story, especially like as a drugs journalist. I'm trying to kind of set the standard a bit in terms of like this is the sort of safest way. But yeah, clearly we're all human, and people can make mistakes, and I certainly did on this occasion.
If I put a Quaalude in front of you right now,
I take it right now. And I'm sober for like 20-something years. I would still take one right now.
And what they portrayed in the movie is exactly what kind of takes over.
Jonah Hill did a really good job on that scene. Like, the Quaalude.
Right.
Steve Madden. That was what it was like. So in the throes of my addiction, I would like to get high at least 4 times a day. So I would wake up at like 5 a.m. before my wife, take 4 Quaaludes. I'd go up and down.
Start.
Yeah, but then I'd be high as a kite between 5 and 7. Then she'd wake up. Then I'd be sober again. So that they don't, like, when they wear off, you're normal again.
The backlash to Louds started in 1972. Medical journals noted that a lot of people were using the drug recreationally. That led to newspaper reports, which eventually led to it being spoken about in Congress. By the end of 1973, it had become a Schedule II controlled substance, meaning it had recognised medical use but carries a high risk of abuse, and prescriptions became more controlled. People could still get it on the black market though, which used a supply that was typically diverted from the legal market. Thefts from factories and warehouses, prescriptions from very friendly doctors, and larger scale operations involving clinics that had gone completely rogue. By the early 1980s, emergency rooms were reporting a lot of lewd-related issues. Addiction rates were going through the roof, and the media was calling it an epidemic by then. The DEA started mounting pressure on the government to fully ban the drug. Quaaludes have been linked to date rape incidents that happened during the 1970s. Bay City Rollers frontman Les McEwen had said that he was given the drug and sexually assaulted by a man in a hotel room when he was 19 during the height of the band's fame in the 70s. It became public knowledge that the comedian Bill Cosby would use Quaaludes during the 1970s in order to incapacitate his victims.
In a 2005 deposition, Bill Cosby admitted giving Quaaludes to a 19-year-old woman before they had sex in Las Vegas in 1976.
In 1984, Quaaludes were moved from a Schedule II to a Schedule I controlled substance, effectively outlawing its medical use entirely. Legal production and sale of the drug ceased immediately, and prescriptions dried up overnight. It became a Class B drug in the UK, meaning production, distribution and possession was totally illegal. The American authorities were mostly able to stamp the use of Quaaludes out.
57 individuals were indicted in Europe, Latin America, and the United States. Investigators say the ring was responsible for importing 54 tons of Quaaludes, a popular depressant used by the drug culture. That amount is equal to 128 million tablets, with an estimated street value of $500 million.
But there was one notable exception, a place where it never went away. That was South Africa, where a street version of the drug is smoked by people living on the fringes of society.
In South Africa, you know, it's sort of like a smoked street drug, like a sort of downer crack. There was these sort of like backstreet chemists that would, create methacalone, or they call it mandrax there, and here in the UK, they call it mandies.
Its rapid onset and increased potency produce a rushing euphoria and, in high doses, total loss of consciousness.
I mean, my buddy totaled his truck the night after doing Quaaludes in Canada, and luckily he emerged unscathed. I mean, his friend had whiplash, but no, this is, it's a serious drug.
It's now started making somewhat of a comeback in the sort of very niche subcultures of sort of psychonauts on these sort of forums and stuff like that. So how's that working, and when did you become aware of that?
Jamie is connected to these sorts of circles of like elite, globe-trotting psychonauts that put on these parties where they basically have access to kind of every possible drug, and you go into the pharmacy and you sort of request a state, and they give you this sort of bespoke combination to achieve that state. But then with Jamie, even though he's connected to these folks, just another guy he knows, I think somewhere from the West Coast, or maybe even Colorado, that he was procuring relatively large amounts of drugs from, just said one day that he also had Quaaludes, and people are talking about on Reddit now. It's on sort of like Telegram, drug menus and stuff.
And what sort of these sort of psychonaut subcultures like this one that Jamie's part of? What sort of societal subsets are in? Is it range, or what type of people attend these parties, for instance?
Yeah, there's like academics. There's a lot of academics, but they're doing like quite kind of far out work, like a lot of neuroscientists. But then also kind of people that go to a lot of festivals, like the sort of people that go to like 12 festivals a year, and they've sort of made a sort of life, like a lifestyle that revolves somehow around drugs.
It's not sort of just one geographical location, then it's a global sort of scenario.
Yeah, it's like a transient sort of psychedelic elite. But it seems from the Telegram and Reddit forums that it's like like all things eventually do, it's disseminating among sort of wider subgroups of people, albeit people that are interested in niche drugs.
In The Wolf of Wall Street, do you think that the depiction of it was correct?
You could be the life and soul of the party under a modest dose of Quaaludes, especially combined with cocaine, like they did in the movie, and you just sort of got this cocaine buzz, stood on like the top of a yacht with like all this money and all these babes, but the Quaaludes have sort of reduced your inhibitions or any anxiety that might come with the cocaine. Yeah. But then you see how it can degenerate, right, with this like near miss with death. But clearly, it did glorify the use of Quaaludes. And I think maybe, Scorsese and the producers maybe thought they had more of a free pass because this drug was like extinct, and it was just unlikely that people were then just immediately going to go out and, use and abuse this drug because it simply wasn't, on the market. But, weirdly and perhaps uniquely, the film, sort of thrust it back into the zeitgeist.
Do we know where it's produced or how that happens? Obviously, it's still big in South Africa. But where is it generally produced?
Yeah, so apparently, like Hugh Hefner was getting lewds in like the noughties, but it's unclear, from where. Because, as you rightly said, throughout the 90s, and as shown in the film, there's these kind of expired batches in people's pant drawers and stuff, and each time someone uses it up, they fade further into the annals of drug history. And so, yeah, it's difficult to find like data on this, right? Because it's like so niche. So yeah, it's not like a huge phenomenon, I don't think. But you know, each time, you know, people, I guess, post online about this, that it gets more interest, and you know, these people that run these labs might pay it some closer attention.
I think Mattha made a couple of mistakes when he was sort of trying Quaaludes that we can all perhaps take something from. Firstly, he actually took 600 milligrams, which is twice the average dose. And a lot of people would advise that the first time you take a drug, you should sort of take a very small amount and see how it affects you as an individual before proceeding. And the other thing he did was mix Quaaludes with GHB, two very strong central nervous system depressants, two very strong sedatives. So you should never mix two drugs like that together. The other question is, will Quaaludes come out of these sort of niche psychonaut circles into the mainstream? Well, it has happened before. Drugs like methadone, for instance, started in these sort of these circles and did break out into the mainstream, but it's very rare for a compound to do that. Although when it does happen, it often happens because there's a certain mythology around the drug, or there's a certain hype around the drug in the press. And with Quaaludes, they certainly have that with the Wolf of Wall Street. But I guess only time will tell on that one. If you find these videos useful or interesting, follow me, hit the bell notification, and I'll see you on the next one.